Hi, everyone, and welcome to this webinar brought to you by the Information Lab. Here at the Information Lab, we dedicate ourselves to helping people make sense of data using Tableau and Alteryx. You're here with Adi, bringing you this bonus webinar mini-series. We're going to focus on the concept of map projections, why we need them, and how we can fool Tableau into using something different than its default setting. The drive for getting this webinar out at this particular time is really the continued and quite misleading media coverage of the coronavirus outbreak. I'm talking specifically about the way in which the distribution of confirmed cases has been represented in map form. If you're thinking about visualizing COVID-19 data in a thematic map, or in fact, creating any map that includes population, and doing that in Tableau, stay tuned to hear the inherent issues with that approach and the potential solutions to those issues. Now, first off, and most importantly, there's a larger debate here about the ethics of visualizing this particular data set at all, given the inherent uncertainties, the complexity of a virus we don't yet fully understand, the fact that today people will die from this. And for the vast majority of us, we lack the expertise in epidemiology to work effectively with these data. Now, what you decide to do is entirely your call. If you do visualize the data, this session will give you the tools you need to reduce misleading effects that are caused purely by the visualization technique. If you don't visualize the data, this session will help to educate you in looking more critically at the news or information that you see. Hopefully you'll find that empowering. Now today we're looking purely at a single mapping technique called choropleth or thematic mapping. And while many choices made in map design are aesthetic, there are a couple of absolutely critical rules that we must follow for any choropleth map that includes population data. We must use something called an equal area projection, not a web mercator projection. Secondly, we must use rates corrected for population, not absolute numbers. Now, these 2 points are not design decisions. They are fundamental treatments of the data that cannot be sacrificed for aesthetic value. If we continue to make choropleth maps without rates and without an equal area projection, we are lying to our audience. Now, this session, I'm calling a quick and dirty approach. We'll follow up next time with more details on different projections, where they come from, and more information on thematic mapping techniques as a whole. But today, all we want to establish are the big pitfalls and how we can avoid them in Tableau. Now, let's look at some examples of choropleth thematic maps. Here we have a map that looks aesthetically acceptable. We have a nice inset globe in the top right to give context. The big issue here, we're seeing raw numbers rather than rates on the map. Secondary to that, we really want to avoid glaring reds with this type of data. We'll move into Europe this time. Here we've dispensed with that glaring red for a more muted color palette, and that works just fine. But we're still plotting raw numbers rather than rates corrected for population. Let's look at a third, into the UK this time. We've got red, again, though that red is rendered redundant because it is within a global context, and that context is not shown in this graphic. And therefore, we see little variation in the colors. And again, raw values used rather than rates. Well, why is this problematic? Well, it entirely defeats the purpose of the map, which is to allow a user to compare values in space. Without correcting for population, we have no standard baseline for comparison. At the time this map was produced, there were 51 cases of coronavirus in London. How can we tell if that is something to be concerned about? 51 cases out of a total population of 60, that seems severe. But what if the population is not 60, but 6,000 or 60,000? How does that change the view we take? What about the southeast of England or Scotland? How many people are living there? Is 18 comparable to London's 51? Is it worse? We have no way of comparing because there is no baseline. And that means that visualizing the data in this way is effectively meaningless. Any coverage that shows you the data in this way is also meaningless. If you decide to visualize, you therefore must get the data and you must correct it for population. We've got to do that work. And later today, I'll show you how to perform that population correction calculation in Tableau. For now, we're going to go back and look at a few more examples, this time at a global scale. Here, we're back with red, all red. You can see no effort has been made to adjust the color according to the underlying values in the data. And those values are raw numbers, not rates. And the layout of the map itself is also misleading, though it may be a layout that you're familiar with seeing. This is the web mercator projection, the default in Tableau. And finally, we're going to look at this very busy offering. We at least have a graduated color scheme, though here we are again providing raw numbers and again using that web mercator projection that is the default in Tableau and also the default in many web mapping applications. In the follow-up episodes, we're going to cover the reasons why web mercator is used in many applications. But for now, we want to establish why it's unsuitable for disease mapping and how we can remedy this. Now, web mercator is on the left of the screen right now. And as I've said, it is unsuitable for disease mapping or any map that involves population. And that's because it distorts the real size of nations on the map. And this is especially pronounced the further away from the equator that we move. On the left, notice how Greenland appears to be equal in size to the entire continent of Africa. In reality, Africa is actually around 15 times larger than Greenland. And this has the effect of playing on people's perception of less or more purely because of the layout or the map projection that's in operation. It appears to emphasize some places more than others, and that in itself can guide our own interpretation of the data that we see. We've got to then use an equal area projection, and that is one that preserves the real life area of places, but in order to do that, it makes some sacrifices with respect to the shape of those places. The projection on the right is an equal area projection called Eckert-4. Now here's the kicker. Tableau will only use a web mercator projection by default, and that's problematic for disease mapping. But we can force Tableau to do things another way by bringing in our own base map. So let's take a look. You might remember from our first episode, The Essentials of Where, that Tableau can read in a range of spatially enabled files. In that first episode, we looked at reading in shape files. We had some KML files, keyhole markup language files that came in from Google Earth. Finally, in that episode, we used something called geojson. And the method I'm going to show you now for getting out of web mercator uses geojson. And it also uses a brilliant little free tool called Dirty Reprojectors. And this was created by the wonderful team over there at Development Seed. And the link to their tool is in the description. As we go along here, I'm going to use Dirty Reprojectors. And remember that you can pause the video if you're following step by step. I'm going to take it quite slowly, and I'll leave some gaps for you to hit pause if you'd like to do that. Now, let's go ahead and take a look at the Dirty Reprojectors tool. Now, as you can see from the description in the left-hand corner, this tool is exactly what we want. We want to download features in different projections. I've done this in step 1 for the countries, which have those internal country borders. But if I click the drop-down, you can see that there are a whole host of other selections that you can make. You can also upload your own data, reproject it, and then download it again to use as your own data source back in Tableau if you'd like to. But the second step is the one that for us, that's where the magic happens. We can choose a different projection for our data, one that is not Web Mercator, and one that is an equal area projection. If we take a look, you can see that we've got a massive list to choose from. In this case, I'm only interested in equal area projections. I'm selecting Eckert 4. I'm also going to put a link in the description box for this video that will take you to a list of equal area projections, and you can choose one of those. And lastly, I hit download, and my reprojected geojson file is immediately received in my downloads. And that therefore is ready to read directly into Tableau. So let's go back into Tableau and start working with this. Now, as we've done before, to add new data, we can hit connect to data. We can hit the add new data source plus button up in the top ribbon. I'm going to hit connect to data, and I'm going to move down to spatial files. And I want my geojson file that I've just downloaded. It's going to pop into my downloads, and I'm going to take my geojson file. And we bring that in, and we can see that we have an incredibly rich data source. We have lots of naming conventions for each of those countries. If we keep moving along to the right, you can also see that this Dirty Reprojectors tool has given us a population estimate field. And that's going to make life easier when we come to correct the COVID-19 cases for population. Now, if I keep scrolling across to my geometry field, notice that the field here says polygon or multi-polygon. And that's what we're expecting. We want country areas to be plotted on the canvas. So let's go ahead and do that in this first worksheet that I've called Base Map View. I'm going to double click the geometry field, and I get that geometry collected for the entire data set in Tableau. I want to interact with each country individually, so I'm going to grab a country identifier field from the dimensions. In this case, I'm using the admin field, and I'll drop that into detail. And now you can see that I can interact with each of these nations individually. Now, I've previously used this worksheet, so I've already washed out the base map, but I'm going to add that back in just now so you can see clearly the difference between these two map projections. And if it's your first time adding this data into Tableau, your Tableau default base map will pop up. So in order to get some clarity back in the view and just have your reprojected base map, all you're going to do is move up to the map option in the top ribbon. We're going to click that. We're going to scroll down to map layers, and we click that. And then you see the map layers pane comes up over on the left-hand side. To get rid of the base map, we're just going to drag the washout slider all the way across to 100%. And then we'll just hit the cross beside the map layers and get rid of that. Okay, smashing. So here we are with one of the two key things that we need to make better thematic maps. We have our equal area projection. Now we want to add the second key thing, the data, and then we're going to correct that for population. Now, the data source that I'm going to use here is the Johns Hopkins data, available at data.humdata.org, and I'll put a link in the description box for this site as well. If you scroll down past their custom dashboard, you can see that you've got quite a few options for downloadable data types. Now I've gone for the first, the confirmed global cases. And if you read that description, you can also see that the original download CSV gives us a wide CSV file. It gives us one column per day. So it will become a wide CSV. Now, I've used Tableau Prep in advance to clean that up a little and leave we with only the most up-to-date confirmed case numbers. To give you an idea of what that looks like before we start working with it, I'm going to connect to it separately in Tableau. So I'm just going to jump into my new worksheet. As I always do, I'm going to click the plus button to add some data. It's a CSV, so I'm going to click the text file. And then I have saved my processed file that I cleaned up a little bit in Tableau on the desktop. And it's this one called Cases from March 31st. Just going to open and add that in. All right, now I'm going to drag this field to map into the view. I'm just going to pop that onto rows. And you can see that that field reflects the country detail. You can also see cases correct at March 31st. These are the number of cases for each of these countries. So I need to find a way to join this back to my custom base map, my reprojected base map, and it is going to be on the basis of this country field. And that is going to join with the admin field from the base map. And then we'll be able to get these cases onto a map canvas. So let's do that. I'm going to move back to my data source tab in the bottom left of my Tableau workbook. And I want to set up this connection between my base map and my COVID-19 data file from the Johns Hopkins website. So you want to add that connection first. And that's up in the left-hand side by connection. So we click add. Again, that's a text file, a CSV. So we'll hit that. And then we're going back. It's the same file, cases from March 31st. So we'll collect that and open it up. Now, as I said, we're looking for the join to run based on the admin field on the left for my base map. And that is going to join onto the field to map on the right. I'm looking for an inner join here. And I can see that this is successfully run. So I'll move now into my raw cases worksheet to make my provisional thematic map for the data. As I did before, I'm going to double click the geometry and bring that into the view. And because I want to interact with all of these countries individually, I'll grab the admin field from the dimensions and also put that onto detail. Now notice here that a couple of countries have dropped out of that join. And if I was going to do something with these data, if I was going to publish this visualization, I'd return back to Tableau Prep, for example, and do a little bit more cleaning of that field to map and my admin field, just to make sure that that join is going to fire off correctly. For now, though, we're going to keep going. What I want is to create this thematic map that represents the cases of coronavirus. So I'm going to grab that from the measures and I'm going to put that onto color. And let me just change these borders ever so slightly, just to dampen that down a little bit. All right, now we need a sense check here. I'm going to check some of these raw numbers. Okay, United States up to nearly 190,000. That, from what I know, that looks right. For China, I'm looking for about 90,000. Okay, we're thereabouts. UK, I know, is sitting at around 25,000. Okay, this looks good. So from the sense check, I know that my numbers are correct. I haven't exploded any data as part of my join. But just because the raw number is correct, it doesn't make our visualization useful. How can I tell whether China's number of cases is still severe? What about the USA? What about Italy? 105,000 cases. These countries have vastly different populations, so we simply cannot compare one country to another globally. We can't do that with this map. I have to go one further and correct for population to give us that baseline for comparison. So let's do that in this final worksheet. If you're following at home, you can also right-click on the worksheet that you're working on and hit duplicate. I'm just going to start from scratch in a new sheet. And I'll redo the process that I've done before to get my base map in first. Double-click my geometry. Then I'm going to add my admin field in onto detail. All right, so far so good. Now, instead of having the number of cases, those raw values on color, I'm going to make a new calculated field by clicking the caret here, this drop down beside the dimensions at the top of the data pane. We're going to go for a new calculated field, and we're going to call that COVID rates. And this is the key part. This is us correcting for population. To do this, we simply want the number of cases per unit population. We have the number of cases in the Johns Hopkins data. So we'll begin by typing that in. We have cases correct at March 31st. So that is the top line. We want that per unit population. So for per, we want to divide by, and we have the population field in the data download from Dirty Reprojectors. So start typing population, and we have that population estimate field. Now that will give us a standard figure that we can compare across the globe. However, because population is large and case numbers are typically small, we'll get out very small numbers, which conceptually can be quite difficult to deal with. So we can add a little bit to this equation, that instead of having the COVID rates per person, we can have the rates per 1,000 people just by multiplying this entire statement by 1,000. We could also do this by 100,000. You'll often see that presented. In this particular case, I'm going to go for per 1,000. So I'm just multiplying that cases divided by population, multiplying that entire statement by 1,000. Let's OK that. And what we're going to do is drag this newly calculated field into the view, and place it on color to get our choropleth map. All right, here we go. Let me deal a little bit with these boundaries. Now, we're getting there on this. You can see on the right-hand side that the range in our data is much less. And this is what we would expect. You can also see that the United States has dropped off completely in terms of what is prominent in the view because we factored in its population. I'm going to try to make this a little bit more clear. I created a color palette in advance that has grouped the data up. So I'm going to implement that now by creating a new calculated field. And let's just call this, try to spell it correctly, color palette. And I have, in fact, got this ready to go in a little text file. So I'm just going to grab this. You can see I've got 6 bins that I've put the data in. And we're going to OK that. And instead of just having the rates in there, we're going to exchange that for the color palette. So we drop that in onto the view. Not doing exactly what we want. Just going to make this a little bit more clear. And let's go for a more useful sequential palette. And let's apply that. Okay, one last thing is I'm going to take the COVID rates back and just drop them on detail. So when I hover over the map, we'll get that information in the tooltip. Okay, now you can see that this color palette works well in identifying those high rate values. We have Spain. sitting at nearly 2.4 cases per 1,000 people. The United States, as I said, has dropped out of prominence because it's less than 1. It's about 0.6 cases per 1,000 of the population. China, which we were so interested in before, less than 0.1 cases per 1,000 population. So we have made the right adjustment with the right baseline for comparison. And what we've picked out, Spain, yes. Italy, yes, that's coming out. Switzerland, also more than 2 cases per 1,000. We also have Luxembourg kind of tucked away here in Central Europe. But also notice Iceland up here to the north, sitting up at nearly 4 cases per 1,000 population. Iceland raises another crucial point about this data. That's reported cases are a function of each nation's testing regime. And for context, Iceland has been absolutely prolific in testing its population. And for cases to be confirmed, people have to be tested. This is another complexity in the data set. If we had more rigorous testing regimes globally, we would be able to say with some certainty what the comparison, what these rates would mean. But we don't have that. So we have this uncertainty to deal with, and that's very difficult in this data set. If you really want to deal with it, you've got to arm yourself with the right information from the right experts in order to interpret things correctly. Now, returning to the color palette I've created, it doesn't do a fantastic job in pulling out the smaller values here. And we could employ a little logarithmic trick to get more granularity in the lower values, but the payoff is that we lose the ability to pick out the subtleties in the higher rates. Let me make that change now in Tableau. So I'm going to take my rates, put them back onto color. All right, now in the shelf, I'm just going to wrap that rates field in a log calculation, and let's choose our Makeover Monday palette again. All right, now this looks very different, especially if we look at South America, across the continent of Africa. We're much more easily able to tell the difference between these countries where we couldn't before. The issue is that we're now able to see the variation in low numbers, but like I said, it makes the subtleties in the higher rates more difficult to pick out. And depending on the purpose of my visualization, I might be more interested in being able to differentiate between those countries that I mentioned with higher rates, so Spain, Italy, Luxembourg, Iceland, and I can't really do that at the minute. The other difficult issue with using this log trick is it can be difficult to explain to the audience what we've done. So although it makes a better aesthetic, it can be more difficult to understand. So I'm going to go back and just grab my original color palette. I'm going to put this on color, and we'll reinstate the rates back on detail so we get that in the tooltip. Now, having gone through these stages and been through this sort of editorial decision making, I'm now really considering whether a choropleth map at the global scale is really the right way to go, given the difficulties there are in comparing all values through space. This map choice doesn't let us do that. It does some things well in the higher rates, but it really blends all the lower rates into one sort of a very light teal color. So even though we've done the work in getting the alternative projection, we've done the work in accessing the population data and performing that calculation, the choice of visualization at the global level, I'm still not satisfied with. So now I need to consider what other options I have if I'm going to release this into the public. And if you come back again next time, we're going to look at possible alternative ways of displaying the data globally, But we'll also look at choropleth and proportional circle techniques at the regional level, where you might have a little bit more success. And with that, we're done. And thanks again to the folks over at Development Seed for making the Dirty Reprojectors tool readily available to everyone. You all are doing a great thing for us. Now, in the coming sessions, we're going to take you through some methodology for performing that reprojection yourself using shapefiles rather than GeoJSON. And we'll show you how to do that in Alteryx, but also in a free piece of desktop spatial software called QGIS. Until then, keep exploring and map responsibly. Feel free to reach out to us here at the Information Lab for solutions to your data challenges. To stay up to date with all our YouTube content, hit the bell icon to subscribe to our channel. Stay safe, and I'll see you all next time.